Ah, Cranky. The perfect character for people who enjoy waiting for animations to finish more than they actually enjoy playing Slay the Spire. No, but really, this is a fantastic character. They're made by Ocean, who has an extensive track record of making great mods, and the animations still haven't finished yet? Wow, okay. Anyway, I've been cranking it for nearly 50 hours now, and the reason I've put so much time into this character is because they have a surprising amount of depth despite their relatively simple mechanics. In terms of balance and overall polish, this is one of the best characters I've played. And even after dozens of hours, I'm still discovering new combos within their card pool, and new uses for cards I previously thought were bad. Dude, how many times is my wrench going to hit this guy? I ended my turn like a full minute ago. Come on, we have to be close, right? Right? Okay, there we go. Full disclosure, that whole intro thing with the animations was a joke. I may have manipulated events a bit to make the animations issue seem worse than it actually is. But yeah, all jokes aside, I love Cranky. The tier list will make a lot more sense if you understand their mechanics, pun intended, so I'll cover them for those who aren't familiar with Cranky, or maybe you played them before but forgot a few details. Cranky's main gimmick is Charge. Charge is a secondary energy source that is not lost between turns. So it's not really a use it or lose it mechanic like regular energy is. You always start with 4 cogwheels, which passively grant charge at the beginning of each turn. You can also manually give yourself more charge by making use of the wind up keyword, such as with Twist, one of your unique basic cards. Spending charge on cards is referred to as spinning, which you can do with cards such as Waddle, Cranky's other unique basic card. Not only does Charge make Cranky less reliant on regular energy, but so does the Part keyword. If a card with Part is in your hand at the end of your turn, an effect occurs, giving you value out of cards that you either don't want to or can't play. Cranky also always has access to tools, such as Spanner, which they always start combat with. Only one tool can be equipped at a time. Tools can be activated or triggered by playing any card with the Actuate keyword. They can also be activated by playing any card that is attuned. Attuned cards activate tools when played, or when not played if the attuned card has the Part keyword, and you can attune any card you want at rest sites as a unique character action. Any card. Even curses, for some reason. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense, so let's begin. As usual, this is a tier list specifically for Ascension 20 Heart runs. And keep in mind, it's currently version 1.3.5 of the mod at the time of making this video, meaning elements may become outdated should the mod be updated in the future. Kicking off the tier list, which is in a randomized order, by the way, is Accelerate. Now, drawing 1 or 2 when upgraded is not exactly inspiring, but the main value of this card comes from adding a Sawblade into your hand. There's a handful of ways to generate Sawblades as Cranky, and this is obviously one of them. Sawblades deal a lot of damage to all enemies for no energy cost, and have loads of synergies within the character. You can vastly increase the output and scaling of Sawblades by retaining them, or by having the efficiency power in play. And Sawblades, as unplayable part cards, are some of the best cards to attune during combat. Even without any of those synergies though, Sawblades are still great throughout most of the game. One of the challenges you will face as Cranky is figuring out how to overcome multi-enemy combats, and Sawblades, and by extension Accelerate, give you an answer to that. Very solid card, deserving of B tier. Though you start with Twist, it's not going to be enough to carry your charge needs. So you'll definitely want some other cards with the wind up keyword. Jack in a Box is fine, 9 damage is acceptable, 4 wind up is acceptable. Really good Act 1 card, but past that it falls off. Another B tier card. I want to like Mend, but it's just so slow. On Ascension 20, Cranky is very unforgiving, and you want to draw into cards that have a moderately impactful immediate effect. Mend doesn't really give you that, unless it's both upgraded and attuned, which is a lot of commitment for a common card early on. There are occasions where you desperately need a card that can attune other cards, which I'll elaborate more on later, but Mend is more of a last resort pick as opposed to a preferred pick. C tier. Waddle is one of Cranky's unique starter cards, and the more I've played the character, the more respect I've lost for this card. To complete the full effect of the card, you need to spend 8 charge on it. I'm usually only comfortable with spending 4 to 6 charge per turn, so Waddle is definitely on the more expensive side. Later on, it just kind of turns into a waste of your charge resource. That said, this card is fantastic for Act 1 and maybe portions of Act 2. As a zero-cost attack card that also gives block, it's very good against Gremlin Knob in particular. It's not uncommon for me to remove Waddle later on in the run, though. B tier would be C tier if it wasn't as good as it is early on. What's better than Blur? Blurry. What's better than Blurry? Blurrier. This is a fantastic block card. 14 block for 1 energy and a small amount of charge is phenomenal at basically any stage of the game. I'll skip it if I already have some solid defense, but otherwise this is a super strong card. A tier. Boosted Blow has the Let Go keyword, which means that you have to spend all of your charge on this card, which is really bad. At least it would be if the fight wasn't over after playing it. Boosted Blow is excellent as a finishing blow, and dominates enemies who have Vulnerable. I'd say this card becomes a liability sometime in late Act 3, but until then, it stomps enemies, especially if you build into it. A tier. Even if I am not relying on charge too much, I'll pick up Crank if I see it. It's easily the best burst gain of charge in the mod, and lets you happily pick up cards such as Whir, Many Movements, and Potential Energy. Several of Cranky's rare cards are either weak or situational, unfortunately, but Crank is nearly always good. Incredible card, highly deserving of the S tier slot. Although you have to lose HP to use it, Dangerous Deterrent often saves you more HP than if you hadn't played it. This card is perfect for resolving multi-enemy fights throughout the entire game. However, if you are already doing quite well in the AoE department, this is a fair card to skip. Judging by how excited I get when I see this card offered to me after the Act 1 boss, I think it's probably around an A tier card. Dazzling Device is our first card, which allows you to switch out your default spanner tool for another one, in this case being Torch. Or, I guess you could also call it a flashlight if you're not from a British English region. I would say that the most reliable archetype for success as Cranky is building around the Attune keyword, and just letting your tool handle your defense and offense needs. If you are reliably activating your tool several times a turn, Torch offers hilarious scaling, and is an obvious pick against single enemy fights. However, don't make the mistake of relying on this in multi-enemy fights. I can assure you that due to the nature of RNG, the Torch is going to hit the exact enemies you don't want it to. None of the enemies will die, and then you will die. If you pick this, you absolutely need another plan to deal effective AoE damage, but that warning aside, this is a very strong card. A tier. Defend. Not horrible, way better than Strikes most of the time, because if your tool is handling your offense, you probably are, well, defending yourself most of the time anyway. Still not a great card though, and Cranky has many better defensive options. C tier. Disorient is one of the only Cranky cards that can apply Weak and Vulnerable. One of the criticisms I have of my own gameplay is that I don't pick this card nearly often enough. Weak is just obviously strong, and Vulnerable, while I don't really build into physical attacks as Cranky too often, is still good with several of Cranky's hard-hitting attack cards. Despite that, I still believe it's more situational than you would expect, so I'll put it in B tier. Emergency Stop is one of the most interesting Cranky cards. It comes with an upside of dealing an insane amount of damage for 2 energy, especially when upgraded. And it comes with 2 downsides that aren't really that big of a deal. It ends your turn, which isn't that bad. It just means you should play this card last during your turn. It also means you can't play it twice through effects such as a duplication potion. It also can't kill enemies directly, but if there's one thing Cranky is good at, it's killing enemies after their turn has already ended. Also, even if you don't have any way to kill enemies after your turn is over through cards or powers, there is a forbidden way to accomplish this. Don't tell Ocean, but if you're quick, you can use your potions after you've played this card to finish enemies off. Just kidding. I personally consider this cheating just like any other tech that relies on timing, but I discovered it while playing naturally, and it was too funny to not bring up somewhere. Anyway, Emergency Stop is awesome. A tier. Extendo Grip is respectable damage and lots of wind-up in one card. Very solid AoE damage pickup, especially for some backup charge generation. A tier. Instead of talking about Fidget specifically, I'll talk about what Fidget is first. Fidget is a card. Not only is it a card, but it's a card that has both the retain and part keywords. Now, retaining parts are extremely valuable because it means that any attune effect on them will trigger every single turn. If it's always in your hand, it also means you can most reliably attune them compared to cards that don't retain. There are 3 retaining parts in Cranky's card pool, and they make an attune-based deck very reliable and easy to pull off thanks to the reasons I stated. I think Fidget is the worst of the 3, but not by too much. Extra windup is always welcome, and a notable combo is with the power Inertia, because Fidget will reset the strength gain every turn. A tier card. Fix Up allows you to get a screwdriver, which is the best defensive tool. I think one of the most difficult yet most essential things to learn as Cranky is which tools to equip and when to equip them, which is still not something I've mastered even after about 50 hours on the character. I tend to build into more offensive tool decks, so while I don't personally rate this card too highly, I think it's likely that I just haven't realized its potential yet. I'll put this card at B tier for now. Screwdriver is a good tool, but there is another way to get screwdrivers in the card pool, which I'll touch on later. It's no secret that I like card draw. So, I really like future proofing. It's unique in that you're going to draw extra cards whether you play it or not. And I'd actually argue that it's better if you don't play it and keep the benefit for next turn. Also, if you can retain future proofing, you draw 2 extra cards every turn passively, which is incredibly strong. A tier. Here we go. I love O'Reilly Gather Parts. This one card provides staggering amounts of sustain, especially when upgraded. The downside is that it can be tough to line up a fatal effect if you're going for attune stuff and your tool is just flinging itself all over the place, but still. Even getting this off a portion of the time is very strong, and gives you the sustain you need to justify taking Coffee Dripper. I will say, I do wish this card exhausted every time it was played rather than just on a fatal trigger, but that would make the card stronger, and it's already very strong as it is, so A tier. Hasty Sweep is extremely powerful for a common card. 8 damage twice on its own is respectable damage for a 2-cost attack, but the best part of this card is the secondary effect. For the low price of just 3 charge, you can exhaust up to 2 cards in your draw pile. This is a super strong effect in nearly every situation. You can, for example, exhaust your basic cards to draw into your better drafted cards more often, or you can exhaust statuses that many enemies and bosses give you during combat. I'm always happy to see Hasty Sweep, and there's not many situations where I wouldn't at least consider taking it. A tier. Let Her Rip is respectable damage and card draw. Discarding cards can be a downside, but I think just having the ability to see more cards on your turn is very good. Notably, it's a great card to pick if you have Snecko Eye. I usually prefer other attack options from the common pool, but this isn't bad at all. B tier. Oh, Masterwork. I used to think you were amazing when I first started playing Cranky, but my respect for you fell off a freaking cliff. 30 charge is a ridiculous price to pay, and even if you can afford it, you'll likely have next to no charge left afterwards. It's just not worth it, especially when the card Tinker exists, which is a significantly more affordable and more reliable way to attune your cards, doubly so if you like to build into small decks like I do. Masterwork is a D tier card for me. Mecha Maneuver. I mean, it's not awful, you do get a refund on energy spent if you have the charge to spare. But it's just not really something I'm ever looking for specifically. There's usually better options when it comes to defense, such as Blurrier, which, by the way, is a common card as opposed to Mecha Maneuver at uncommon. It's not quite D tier, but it's pretty close at C tier. Mesmerize is the only card capable of applying the Dizzy debuff to enemies. Dizzy is a permanent debuff that makes it so enemies who take attack damage lose 1 strength for the turn. That's an incredibly strong effect, but it's unfortunately on a character who doesn't rely on physical attacks too often. I still try to pick at least 1 copy of this card up because it's a fantastic way to defend yourself against the Corrupt Heart's multi-hit attack, but again, it's not as good as you would think. B tier. Metal Sheet is a card that says you are going to block, whether you like it or not. As a part card, it has several benefits, such as making it a great attune target, or you can retain it for passive block every turn. I don't think Metal Sheet is quite impactful enough to remain competitive with the other block cards, but it's okay in a pinch. C tier. New Winder allows you to replace your tool with an Allen key. It took me some time to understand what the purpose of this card is, but I figured it out after a while. This card allows you to commit to an attune-based deck while also giving you an answer to multi-enemy fights. Vigor makes it easy to focus down a specific enemy, especially because many of Cranky's cards hit multiple times. And if you want, you can also convert that vigor into massive AoE damage. If Dazzling Device is the go-to tool against single targets, New Winder is the go-to tool against multiple targets. I don't think it's as good as Dazzling Device, but still a solid B tier card. As mentioned, Cranky is a pretty simple character with a surprising amount of depth. Admittedly, Pitch Point is one of the cards that I haven't played with as much as I should have, but I see the potential. I see it. Pitch Point is a great example of a card that rewards creativity. If you use Machinic Modification on it, for instance, it could actually be a great charge generator since you could play it multiple times a turn pretty reliably. Not to mention that if you attune it, even just once, it can indirectly lead to loads of extra damage and block per turn. It's just overall a really cool card that I wish I had picked more often. I will say that it doesn't seem that great if you don't build around it somehow, but out of sheer awe at the many potential plays you can make, I'll sneak it into A tier. For a while, I thought Potential Energy was borderline useless, but it absolutely has its places in several decks, such as any deck where you have Snecko Eye, Runic Pyramid, or just excess charge when you'd rather have energy. Absolutely a situational card, but not necessarily a bad one. Quick note, the wording seems to imply that you can spin multiple times if you have a lot of charge, which would matter with powers such as Greased Cogs. But it seems that it only happens in a single spin action instead. Ocean, if you're watching, please make it actually spin multiple times. That would be a fair buff, I think. Thank you. Anyway, I'd put this in a B tier. Quick Fix is a tragic card. I want to like it so badly, but it's just not impactful enough. Cranky is a very unforgiving character on Ascension 20, and Quick Fix just doesn't do enough. This isn't a never pick card, but I wish it were more viable. C tier. You're going to want more wind-up cards besides your starting Twist card, and Ready Up is a perfect start for resolving that desire. Additionally, because Cranky has lots of expensive common and uncommon cards, that 1 energy next turn can really matter. B tier. The existence of Tinker is an absolute blessing. I love this card. It is the single best card for enabling the Attune archetype. Tinker feels like it was made just for me. Not only do I tend to keep my decks small, which is where Tinker works best, but I take lots of card draw, so I can attune most of my deck in a single turn. If you draft any of the 3 retaining parts, drawing Tinker means you are guaranteed to be able to attune them if you've drawn them before or at the same time as Tinker. Such a great card, I rarely skip this, especially if it's upgraded. S tier, this single-handedly carried a large portion of my A20 Cranky wins. Not all good things last forever. My spirits are high from me fangirling over Tinker, but it's time to come crashing down. If you do the math and just think about it practically, Reinforce is not a good card. Even if you play Crank immediately beforehand to get 25 charge, Reinforce will convert all of that into just 6 plated armor. Which, don't get me wrong, that's okay, but I can guarantee that I could have instead used that charge to just get 6 or more block per turn myself. This is also another card that would be slightly better if it exhausted, but alas, it does not. So it is yet another sad addition to the G tier. Rejig is a pretty reliable way of getting strength, which when paired with Cranky's zero-cost attacks or attacks that hit multiple times, is absolutely a solution for early to mid-game combats and bosses. I do find that New Winder is generally better for taking advantage of physical attacks, but this is fine too. I'll usually pick it up if I don't have a solution for the Act 1 boss yet. B tier. Resonance is a wonderful block choice. It costs 0, so you can always gain block out of it. The charge cost to increase that block is not an unreasonable ask. And you can either scale it really quick, or just get block out of it many times in quick succession, with Twisting Strike or as far as it goes. This is another card that I personally haven't picked too often, but I understand the potential. I think it deserves a spot in the A tier. Rewinder is not only the best retaining part card, but it's also one of the best Cranky cards in general. Having the ability to retain cards is an extremely powerful effect in Slay the Spire, and it's especially powerful in Cranky. There's so many applicable uses for this, but I'll just list a few. You can retain another part card to not only get the part effect every turn, but also benefit from your tool every turn if the card is attuned. You can retain O'Reilly Gather Parts for some easy fatal procs, and you can retain Saw Blades for mass AoE damage and scaling. Such a great card. There's a place for this in literally every deck, unless you have Runic Pyramid, I guess. S tier. Salvage is pretty bad. Salvage Plus, on the other hand, is pretty great. Having the choice of which tool to equip is so much better than just being given a random tool. Because tools are so situational, there's usually an optimal tool to have in any specific circumstance, and Salvage Plus lets you access that tool, even if you haven't encountered any of the other tool cards yet. Excellent card that can easily save your life, but it obviously needs an upgrade. A tier. At a certain point after you've played Scanner, you've already just won the fight. You should probably take Twisting Strike at nearly every opportunity, which also means that you can play a card of your choice over and over again, which means Scanner could scale it to the moon. Even if you aren't really using your tool that often, I would take this because it's simply reliable scaling, especially in longer fights. S tier. I view Solder as an alternate version of Jack-in-a-Box. It provides decent block, as well as a touch of charge. Perfectly fine early game pickup. I'll set it next to its counterpart in B tier. Strike. Don't make me laugh. This card is awful, evil, pitiful, and you should remove it at every possible opportunity. D tier. Swift Stomps is one of those cards that you can make a full build around. Cranky has many ways to gain strength or vigor, and Swift Stomps benefits from those 3 times. Even if you don't have any of that, 12 damage for 1 energy is pretty good. I feel that a tool-based build is more reliable and easier to assemble than a strength or vigor-based build, but that doesn't mean this isn't a great card. A tier. You know Ironclad's Searing Blow card? Teddy Bear is the Cranky equivalent to that. Most cards can only be integrated or attuned once at rest sites, but Teddy Bear can be integrated infinitely. Very similar to Searing Blow, this card is horrendous if you take it any later than like floor 5. However, if you do get it very early and can path into a lot of rest sites, you can actually turn this into a win condition. The trick is to attune this card at every single rest site. Invest everything into it. Then just play it during combat as much as you can through Twisting Strike, for example. Even better if you can get proficiency to significantly boost the power of attuned cards. I won a single run using this card and vowed not to ever do it again. It's just too demanding and gimmicky. For that reason, I would say it's D tier. Twist is an excellent card all around. Not only does it carry your early and mid-game charge needs, but it has a fantastic upgrade, and it is a fantastic attune target because as a part card, it will trigger regardless of whether or not you play it. For a starter card, this is amazing and deserves A tier. Unleash Rage is kind of interesting. The part effect is better to me than the main effect, so it's another card you should try not to play when possible. Another reason you're not going to play it is because you're not going to pick it in the first place. Cranky has many better ways of both dealing immediate damage and gaining strength or vigor to improve physical attacks. Like most cards, there is a time and place for Unleash Rage, but not really as often as you would expect. C tier. Whir is hands down the best card draw card that Cranky has access to, especially when upgraded because it draws 4 cards for 0 energy and 6 charge, a fantastic amount of value. Drawing cards means you can draw into your retaining parts faster, and cards such as Tinker benefit massively from this as well. Great card all around, S tier. Whirl exists. That's about all I can say about it. Cards such as Extendo Grip and even Accelerate provide better and more reliable AoE damage. This is one of those cases where Whirl is just outclassed, even despite the fact that it hits twice, which has its own benefits. C tier. Worm Gear is viable in extremely specific decks where you have lots of parts. Personally, I tend not to have many parts in my decks, and the parts that I do have retain, so this card serves no purpose, but it's actually really fun when you can make it work. Unfortunately, just because of how niche it is, I'll have to put it into D tier. I have conflicting thoughts on Advance. On one hand, draw and energy is good. On the other hand, this drains your charge really, really fast. I still think it's a great card, but the spin requirement is definitely pretty steep, and it's not a card you want to add unless you have a slight excess of charge on average. A tier, despite being very demanding, Advance is also very rewarding. As far as it goes, for me, gets C tier, and that's as high as it goes. Now, it might deserve to be higher, but hear me out. 4 block is sad, that's worse than a base defend, so let's just focus on the secondary effect. Shuffling any amount of cards from your discard pile into your draw pile is good, but as I've mentioned repeatedly, I build small decks. And I would recommend you do the same on Cranky because of the possibility of attuning the same cards over and over again. Anyway, my decks tend to be small with lots of draw, so if I want to see the cards in my discard pile again, I could play as far as it goes. Or I could just wait like one turn for the draw pile to naturally reshuffle. This card would probably be a lot more effective on another character. Cogwheels may seem underwhelming, and it often is. Cogwheels gives you cogwheels when played. The way I see this card is that it cancels out the cost of cards such as Rewinder, making that card's effect cost 0 charge, kind of, if you really stretch it. I do think it's a lot better to just take other cards that give you charge, but Cogwheels isn't untakeable. Still, I think it's niche enough to the point where it goes into the D tier. Let's have a quick chat. On Ascension 20, you are more likely than not to face Awakened One. Awakened One really punishes you when you play power cards. Okay, chat over. Crunch Battery is incredibly weak as a power card. I don't think those two very small benefits are ever worth the draw and energy to play. It is going into the D tier, but this card has one fantastic use. The beta art is funny. That's about it. Diligent Work is the only X-Cost Cranky card, and unfortunately, it does not do the X-Cost family justice. It has no immediate effect, and the effect that it does provide can be replaced through 1 or 2 plays of the card Tinker. I'll sometimes take it, but I'm never truly thrilled to see it. C tier. Efficiency is very expensive, but the high cost can be worth it depending on your deck. I think this card is best used with Saw Blades for double damage and double scaling, or if you have 2 or so copies of Future Proofing for loads of card draw. It's also fantastic with Peep the Hall, but unfortunately, playing both Efficiency and Peep the Hall is very demanding in terms of energy. Besides those examples, I think Efficiency is too niche to be realistically pickable in most decks. High C tier. Flying Cogs is another card that performs best when paired with Saw Blades or the trinkets from Peep the Hole. Unfortunately, besides those awesome synergies, this card often is not great. When I have parts in my hand is usually because I'm retaining them, and the card draw that this offers is outclassed pretty hard by Future Proofing and Whir. C tier. I actually think Fool Me Twice is the best card to pick if you are going for a physical attack-based build as Cranky. One of my heart kills revolved around this card as a main damage source, and you can scale it incredibly quickly with Twisting Strike. Once you've scaled it, you can use the card Synchronize to copy it, and at that point, it's GG, as the kids say. Excellent card, A tier. I wouldn't argue with anyone who says it should be S tier, though. Speaking of S tier, welcome home, Greased Cogs. So many of Cranky's strong cards either have consistent spin effects, or they spin multiple times at once, which is perfect for accumulating lots of block quickly. On the topic of cards with consistent spin effects, Gyroscope fits that description. Just the fact that it's a retaining part means it is deserving of respect. But this card dishes out incredible damage as well, dominating the early game. I've been debating whether or not this is a better card than Fidget, but because I'm on the spot right now, I'm going to officially say that it is. Inertia is one of Cranky's better ways of gaining strength, even if the strength does ebb and flow a bit. There's many ways of winding up, and there's many ways of spending the strength, even if you lose it immediately afterwards. Excellent Act 1 and maybe Act 2 pickup, and I can see a build based around this if you get multiple copies. A tier. Kinetic Salvo is not only great block, but also great wind-up potential, especially against enemies who hit multiple times. Really good card, another A tier. Lost Cog is another one of those common attacks that are fine pickups in the early game, but you'd never look twice at one later on. C tier. I would consider Many Movements another niche card. It takes 10 charge to get through all of those effects, which is about double of what I am comfortable with spending per turn on average. However, it does do a little bit of everything, so anything you'd want a card to do is kind of covered by this. You definitely need some excess charge before you would consider picking this though. B tier. Munch Battery. Oh, am I supposed to say something? Sorry, I was distracted. I think this is slightly better than its counterpart, but not by that much, I guess. D tier. Peep the Hall is one of the most fun power cards in the mod, but I actually don't think it's very good. It consistently provides small benefits, but the benefits are inconsistent. When you want to block, you'll get the trinket that just gives you charge, for example. The trinkets do have good synergies, as I mentioned before, but besides those, this isn't really a card you want to build around. It's fine as a solution to early elite and boss combats, at least. C tier. There has never been a time during my Cranky gameplay where I either thought, wow, I really wish I had perpetual form right now, or wow, I sure am glad I have perpetual form in this fight. Those just aren't thoughts that happen. Not only is it a very expensive card to play, but you lose 2 energy per turn after playing it. You do gain the ability to use your charge as energy, which also kind of lets you retain energy between turns as if you had the ice cream relic, but I often find that the downsides of this card massively outweigh the upsides. In fact, I think this is one of the weakest form cards I have ever seen. Now it's definitely possible, if not likely, that I'm missing something here and it's a lot better than I'm giving it credit for, but I'd put it in the D tier. Cranky's rare cards are either misses or just too situational. Precise Tuning is one of the more interesting draw cards. It's similar to Defect's Scrape card and has similar downsides, where cards that do not meet the criteria are discarded, meaning it is likely that you will draw past your important cards and not have the ability to play them until your next deck cycle, which is really bad. If you take Precise Tuning, you'd better either have your powerful cards mostly attuned already, or have a plan to get them attuned fast during or out of combats. Very niche, but I understand it can be very powerful as well. B tier. Read instructions is just crazy. If you are doing tool shenanigans with any tool besides the screwdriver, this doubles the block you gain from each tool activation. Forget the damage increase. The block is much more notable. Read instructions is also the only way you can get proficiency from Cranky's card pool, making it even more valuable. S tier. Rearrange is yet another fine early game pickup if you need an attack. I don't think it's amazing, but it performs really well against Gremlin Knob, for example, as you can exchange one of your skills for a powerful attack you already have played. It's an okay card. C tier. Artifact isn't as useful on Cranky as it is on Defect, so Defect's similar artifact granting card is generally better, but Cog Surge certainly is not bad. A copy or two of this in any deck doesn't hurt. B tier. Rotational Chaos is the last card that generates a Saw Blade, and it's a fun one because of the secondary effect. For the admittedly high cost of 8 charge, you can play what is essentially 2/3 of a Distilled Chaos potion. I value this card about as much as I value Accelerate, maybe slightly more, so I'll put it in front of that. Scatter Nails is similar to Mend, where it needs both an upgrade and to be attuned at a rest site to be really good, but if you can do that, this is a solid attack for the early and mid game, especially when paired with Twisting Strike to play it multiple times in the same turn. It does provide a bit of chip damage every turn as well, but I find that aspect is usually more or less negligible. B tier. Synchronize has so many use cases. It's a very sad card if you don't have 8 charge to spend on it, but if you do, it's incredible. I've mentioned a few synergies previously, but copying a retaining part is usually very strong, copying Flash of Steel or Finesse is usually very strong, etc. It has so many use cases, in fact, that I'm usually comfortable picking it speculatively, meaning I don't have any combo pieces in my deck yet. A tier. Tip. Here's a tip. Pick this card. I find that this is generally just a better card when it comes to reducing strength than Mesmerize is, and it's useful in every stage of the game. Nothing game-breaking, but just another one of those cards that are simply nice to have. A tier. Toolerang can gain lots of attune very quickly, especially if you pair it with, you guessed it, Twisting Strike. This is a one-card solution for early game combats, and I usually don't pick it later on, though I can see why somebody would do so, especially if it's upgraded. Another addition to the oddly stacked A tier. Finally! Twisting Strike, the card I've been alluding to for basically the entire video. This card lives up to the hype. It's going to the very top of S tier. Generally speaking, in Slay the Spire, any card that lets you get a card back into your hand from your discard pile is extremely strong. But even more so on Cranky, as Cranky has several cards that are just better the more you could play them, as well as zero-cost cards that you could play multiple times. And even if you have 0 energy remaining, you can get a part card back into your hand for a passive benefit of your choice. This card makes it super easy to go infinite too if you have Snecko Eye, and there's a mountain of other use cases, but I've been recording for a while, and I want to wrap this video up because it's getting quite long, so let's just go to the next card. Vexing Glare pairs very well with the retaining part cards and provides decent AoE damage if you don't have any already. The damage it deals is quite low, however, and doesn't scale, so it's exclusively an early game pickup, C tier. Wear and Tear is not a card I value that highly. It deals 21 damage, which isn't much more than one of the other 2-cost common cards that are super good, and the part effect is not that inspiring either. I'd pick this up in early Act 1 and maybe at the end of Act 1, but that's about it. C tier. And finally, Machinic Modification. There's rarely a reason to not pick this card up. It just has an effect that's guaranteed to be good. The best target for this is probably Pitch Point, as I mentioned earlier, but there's some other great targets as well. I suppose it's an S tier card. And there we have it. As I've mentioned multiple times, Cranky is a surprisingly deep character, and I could probably put another 50 hours into them and still be learning new things. There's likely a few cards that are misplaced here, so if you disagree, I'm up for discussion. Thank you for watching, thanks to Ocean for making this amazing character, and you can play this amazing character right now from the Steam Workshop for free. I'd highly recommend them, they're one of the best characters I've played. That's it. Goodbye.